sweet Kentucky Fried Fuck. What, in the name of all that is holy and good, did I just fucking listen to? Like, this is inarguably the most batshit crazy over-the-top piece of power metal buffoonery I have heard in 2021. This is fucking bonkers. Hypercube Necrodimensions is the debut studio album from Wizardthrone, a supergroup whose fusion of melodic death and power metal has been cheekily dubbed as extreme wizard metal, and whose lineup is comprised of members of Aetherrealm, Gloryhammer, Necrogoblicon, Veil of Nath, even featuring Chris Bow's pirate metal's own literal god of mischief on keyboards and synthesizers. The written music is consistently very flamboyant, very extravagant and over the top, and the actual concept itself, as far as I can tell, seems to deal with a cabal of intergalactic wizards who are seeking the multiverse for infinite knowledge and magical power. To be blunt, it's just completely, consistently fucking ridiculous. If you told me that this was the soundtrack to a long-lost Dungeons & Dragons campaign inspired by Doctor Strange comic books and the music of Winter Sun and Rhapsody of Fire, I'd fucking believe you. And yes, let's just address the elephant in the room. Oftentimes, that ridiculousness is a bit too much to handle. Like, don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen, contrary to popular belief, I don't mind a little bit of fresh grated cheese every now and then on a plate of delicious, fresh, homemade pasta. But what Wizardthrone have done here is they've taken my pasta and they've just, like, left an entire brick of Parmesan on top, and they've just poured liquid hot scorching nacho cheese over the entire bowl. But if, like myself, you are willing to comb through that bowl, to remove that brick, to scrape away as much of that liquid goop as possible, and to find the few noodles that actually have an adequate, respectable amount of cheese on them and are still perfectly seasoned, just the way Mom likes, then you might actually still have some fun with Hypercube Necrodimensions. And how do I know? Because, spoiler alert, I kinda did. I wasn't really expecting it, to be honest. I mean, I was expecting to pretty much just roll my eyes through the entirety of this thing, and okay, to some extent I was. But as much as I was doing that, I was also giggling, I was also headbanging, and just generally kind of enjoying whatever the fuck extreme wizard metal is. The written music itself is actually really inventive and really well produced and arranged and presented. It feels most like a combination of the very cheesy, self-aware power metal of Gloryhammer and the more grounded melodic death metal of Aetherrealm. The track Forbidden Equations has the urgency, the sneering brutality of the Black Dahlia Murder, with some very dry, phlegmy vocals very reminiscent of Jeff Walker from Carcass, combined with some of the very epic guitar riffs and harmonies, very reminiscent of, like, mid to late 90s power metal, and the blaring synthesizers. It makes for something genuinely pretty cinematic and engaging. It really does feel like you're being sucked through a portal into another part of time and space, another timeline, another fucking dimension, which I have to assume, based on the lyrics and based on the band's overall image and aesthetic, is 100% the fucking intention. The title track, Hypercube Necrodimensions, goes straight for the jugular as well, with an incredibly intense and fantastical display of keyboards wrapping and weaving themselves around some pretty straightforward and meaty kind of power metal riffery. It's every bit as surgically precise as it is inevitably infectious. Like, even now as I speak, I've got this riff circling around in my brain, practically running laps. It's got an incredibly strong chorus, which again feels weirdly reminiscent of Carcass to me. It does kind of feel like something that, in theory, I might have heard on the Surgical Steel album. but there are also some really funky kind of harpsichord and organ parts here, some semi-spoken word passages that make this genuinely pretty ominous and mysterious, some wild operatic vocals constantly wailing in the distance as if to warn you of impending doom. It's pretty damn wild, but despite that, never grows to be overwhelming or obnoxious or irritating. In fact, it's probably one of my favorite cuts on the record. Closely followed, mind you, by Frozen Winds of Thyraxia, which, on top of sporting a little bit of a black metal underbelly and some influence from very early Children of Bodom, also kinda sounds like an actual spell, one that perhaps the aforementioned Doctor Strange may cast while fighting some kind of intergalactic supernatural creature. Now, I do think that as time goes on, and especially with repeat listens, the album does grow to feel somewhat one-dimensional and repetitive. I mean, there's really only so many times you can hear about the exploits of these bizarre, otherworldly, magical beings and still be kind of impressed. Like, remember earlier in the review when I said, let's try and push as much of that cheese to the side as possible? Well, guess what? Eventually that cheese just does seep to the bottom, whether you like it or not, and you are left with a bowl of oily, greasy, fatty, cheesy bullshit. But there is still a surprising amount of musical finesse and intelligence to this entire affair. Maybe extreme wizard metal is indeed a gimmick, but everyone in this band is 100% dedicated to that gimmick. They would die for this gimmick. They would go to war for this gimmick. And it's hard not to, on some level, even if you actively dislike this music, appreciate that level of dedication. And it just so happens that I do not actively dislike this music, which makes it even easier to appreciate everything altogether. With all this in mind, I am weirdly, perhaps even surprisingly, going to give this a very enthusiastic 3.5 out of 5. This may not be a record I return to as frequently as others we've talked about on the Metal Meltdown. It's definitely not getting thrown on a workout playlist or getting jammed at the next family barbecue, but it is a record that, while it was on, I thoroughly enjoyed. I will revisit once or twice again in the future, and would have no issue recommending to anyone looking for some really funky, really ambitious, and really bizarre kind of power melodic death metal fusion shit. It's very unique, very well made, filled to the brim with genuine heart and passion and skill. I mean, sure, it's also totally fucking ridiculous. Anyone attempting to argue otherwise has not listened to this album, plain and fucking simple. But it's fun despite the ridiculousness of this entire concept. It's fun despite the insanity, and in some cases, because of the insanity. Is it my cup of tea? No, not really, but y'all should know me by now. Y'all should know that I am not consistently a huge fan of power metal. I don't like Cheese Whiz literally dumped in my tea like so many of you, but even despite that, I still enjoyed a lot of what is on this album, and as such, I stand by my score, 3.5 out of 5, a surprisingly really good album. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately if you aren't somehow already. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.